Hello, listeners. This is your guest editor, Leyla, speaking. My audio had a little bit of a goof 'em up after Aaron's summary of Transistor, so if you hear a change in quality, that's why. But otherwise, feel free to buckle up, put your tray tables up, and enjoy this smooth ride through the 2014 entry in the Supergiant Games canon. And please do come back next week for the beginning of spooky season, as we do talk about Twilight, because I live to torture my friend. Thank you so much for your continued listenership, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
Welcome to Mortified, the Friendship Quest, a podcast where two long-distance friends bounce media recommendations, all in hopes the other will like it. I'm Aaron.
And I'm L-Spine. Not the spine, just one of them.
And this week, we beat up some monsters with our sword boyfriend in Transistor. Before we hum along to the apocalypse, remember you can help us on Mortified the Legitimacy Quest by subscribing to us on YouTube, iTunes, or Spotify, signing up for our monthly newsletter through the link in our show notes, or following us on Twitter and Tumblr at MortifiedPod. Leyla.
Aaron.
Do you have fond memories of 2014?
I can't remember 2014. It's in my 2010 to 17 void.
That makes sense. That's valid. Do you remember this game?
It's one of the only things I do remember.
Great. Can you tell me about your experience of playing Transistor, presumably when it first came out?
Yeah, I wept for hours.
Okay.
Are you kidding me? It fucked me up. So, no, I love Transistor. It's probably one of my favorite titles of all time. Something in me fundamentally shifted during the sequence with the spine where the Transistor asks Red, or confesses his love to Red, and it is dubious as to whether or not she can hear him in the first place. Something shifted in me that day, and it hasn't been the same since. I think about that game all the time. So, yeah. How was your experience playing it for the first time in the year of our Lord 2021?
It was interesting. I mean, first off, I'll say, did I like playing it? Yes, I had a good time. It was a quick, less than 5 hours. Played it on my Switch, which, we'll talk about how that may or may not have impacted my experience, but it was nice just to be able to hold it and play it on the couch. Yeah, I had a little bit of trouble with the combat initially, but I sort of got it figured out once I played for an hour or so. But I liked it, and I'm glad I played it, because that means I'm getting through Supergiant's catalog. I just got to do Bastion and what's their other one? I feel like they have another one.
It's just Bastion, Transistor, Pyre, and Hades in that order.
Oh, okay. Then it's just Bastion. That's it, baby.
Ah, look at you. Yeah, I started Bastion in 2012 when I was in college, and then I've been just a giga fan of them ever since. So to the point where one of my friends did make fun of me on Twitter one time, because he was like, "Are they paying you?" And I was like, "They should be at this point." It's just a stan,
Listen, we talked about Hades in last year's episode, and I think it's pretty fair that if Supergiant paid us, we would absolutely take their money, but they don't have to, because we love their games. They're great.
Yeah, if they were like, "Hey, Leyla, can you spend 6 hours a week talking about our games for free?" I would be like, "Yeah, no, 100%. That just comes naturally to me. Why not?"
Yeah.
But yes, it's funny because so you're going in their catalog. What is the order that you played? Is it Pyre, Hades, Transistor, and then Bastion's next?
Yes. I probably mentioned this in our Hades episode, but I started playing Pyre because you tweeted about it so much in 2017, I want to say, maybe 2018, but around that time, and I was just like, okay, Leyla thinks this is a good game. She is an internet person that I know that has good taste. And then I played Pyre for 8 hours straight and beat it in one setting. And I was like, that was a pretty good game.
Listen, Wizard basketball's pretty fucking cool. Yeah, so it's funny because you're playing them so out of order, but since I played them in release order, you can like really watch a very logical evolution in the way they approach their narratives, which I think is really cool. But yeah, how does it feel bouncing around?
I mean, like you're saying, it definitely does feel like you can see where the iterations of their characters come from. Like, I don't think in Transistor, right, you don't get like the full-bodied, like almost dating sim-esque like character models that slide in and deliver dialogue like you did in Empire and Hades, but like you still get where their strong character building is coming from, where they have like, you know, most of their lines are fully voiced, and you know their interest in both music and this like kind of stunning aesthetics. Like, you can definitely see that is absolutely Supergiant's oeuvre, and you know this is why Transistor was like so popular and good, because like there's a lot of really interesting elements in it, and you know I'm glad that I'm really kind of learning all about Supergiant's history, but there were definitely points that I stumbled, especially as far as like the story goes, but we will get into that as the episode continues. Do you want me to try to do the plot summary?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So the game opens with Red pulling a big blue USB sword out of a guy, and the game opens with the line, "Hey Red, we're not gonna get away with this, are we?" Which, like, already pretty significant tone setting. It's like, oh, this is gonna be a sad game. And from there we learned that you know, the sword is the transistor. You know, Red is able to use it to fight these weird robot creatures called the Process, which are like kind of like if you know, the Apple aesthetic of like the late 2000s became evil, and you know, grew legs and shot lasers and stuff. Like they're you know, various white shapes that are trying to get you. And it mostly utilizes a turn-based system, kind of like you can freeze time and then take your actions and then they'll play out in real time, and you know, that's a pretty cool system. But yeah, you fight your way through this city, which is called Cloud Bank, and you try to figure out why you know, both of the Process are here and why your boyfriend's dead. The guy that was stabbed, you know, we're going to be calling him the Sword Boyfriend. I think there's some stuff in the game files that refer to him as the Boxer at some point. So, you know, he doesn't have a real name, but like, you know, that's kind of the main narrator of the story. And we learn over the course of, you know, Red fighting her way through this city, that this group called the Camerata orchestrated her assassination at a concert that she was putting on. She's a very famous singer, and like her music is in fact so moving to the people of Cloud Bank, like politically, I think is the implication, or at least, you know, on some very deep emotional level, that it was causing people to like have fights and like, you know, try to advocate for something greater. And that's why the Camerata was so interested in Red, because she was such an interesting singer. Anyway, you fight one member of the Camerata named Sybil, who actually is the reason why your boyfriend's dead, because she was apparently in love with you and obsessed with you. You know, we'll talk about that. You defeat her. You keep going through the city, and you fight a big thing. I don't know how to describe the spine of the world, but basically it's just like a big snake monster type deal. Eventually you kill it and you do rip its heart out, which is very cool. And that it was affecting the transistor in some way. It was like slowing him down and making him say he was like kind of drunk. And you know, that's what Leyla was alluding to earlier when she was talking about his confession of love to Red, because that's what happens when he's like, you know, out of it, and it's hard to tell whether or not Red can even understand what he's saying. But like, you get to the end, you meet this guy named Royce, who is like, yeah, so the Camerata's whole deal was that, you know, you've been doing these terminals that like made people vote on what this color the sky was and like whether or not you wanted to have architecture and shit. Anyway, we thought that was boring. So we decided to make a sword to undo that, I guess. And then it fucked up, and we did kill most of the people. We sent them to the country, so to speak. Eventually you put the transistor, the sword, back in the cradle, which sort of resets everything. It stops the process from destroying Cloudbank. You have to fight Royce in a cool duel where both of you have transistors and both of you are able to pause time and do this cool like turn-based fight, which is a very, very fun final boss fight. And then of course you win. You go back to Cloudbank and you're able to restore parts of the city that the process was destroying and eliminating. But the last thing that happens is that you go to the body of the boxer. You sort of restore his body when you realize that he is still stuck in the sword. He's not coming back to life. Red lies down and right next to him and impales herself with the transistor, which is kind of a suicide thing, but also like she knows that she's going to live on in the transistor with him. And they like the final panel of the game is like this idyllic countryside, the country that the people have been evacuated to / are sent to when they die. So like we'll talk about that, but it's a very melancholy game, and it did evoke some feelings in me, and I think it's very well done, but the storytelling is very subtle and in a way that I missed a lot of it and had to go back and like watch videos and reviews to sort of understand.
Right. I mean, you did mention that the first of all, excellent summary, great job.
I mean, you wrote it.
I wrote a loose outline. You did a lovely job narrating. But you did mention that you think the playing on the Switch kind of hampered your experience. In what way?
Well, the problem with the Nintendo Switch is that when you're dealing with a text-based game, the text is very small, and I had to oftentimes bring the Switch very close to my face to read it, and it got to the point where I was just like, this is hurting my eyes. So eventually there are parts where you can check your upgrades, and the upgrades are characters, and at a certain point I was just using the same ones and not bothering to go through and read the full stories in the characters, because as you use them you unlock more of their story, and I was just I don't know about this, and this is hurting my eyes. And also there's another point, these QVC terminals that are, how the citizens vote on the way that they want Cloudbank to look. I didn't realize that you could have Red type a comment in, which gives so much of her characterization because she can't speak. I didn't mention that, but when, Red was almost killed, the Camerata stole her voice and put it in the transistor. So, the only way you really get what Red is thinking besides her actions and a couple cutscenes is the way that she types into these comments, essentially internet comments. And there's definitely parts where I had missed. There's a part where she makes a comment about the spine of the world that says that she's very worried that it's hurting the boxer and affecting him in that way. And she types out the comment I'm gonna stop this thing and I'm gonna break its heart, which makes a lot more sense that there is the whole sequence that she goes back and literally tears its heart out. I didn't get any of that until I went back and watched this video, which I will link in the show notes. But it's by a YouTuber I like very much, Games as Lit 101. But he does a great breakdown of Transistor, and I didn't know that until I watched this video. I was like, oh, that's why there was that whole sequence. So yeah, I think that there are parts of it that are very easy to miss. The music plays a lot of has a lot of emotion and also does a lot of narrative story building, right? The Sybil, right? The song that plays when you fight Sybil is very important. And I heard parts of it that I won't save you. I thought that was cool, but I'm also playing it through my Nintendo Switch speakers, which have to fight with my Nintendo Switch fan, which is blaring at the same time. And it's just dang it.
Yeah, that'll do it, huh? I did play it on PC.
Which I should have done. I'll admit.
Well, the whole benefit of the Switch is convenience. I will say, like, I tried to start replaying Bastion on the Switch, and I struggled with the controls quite a bit. So I think there is something in terms of porting that there is a challenge in like getting the feel right again. I famously gripe about the Dark Souls port to PC all the time because it's very hard to navigate, and then in addition to it already being a challenging game, so there's definitely something to that. Yeah, but so something I think worth filling in terms of the plot breakdown is that the Camerata did not intend on stealing Red's voice with the transistor. They intended on just killing her with it. And then the way the transistor works is that it absorbs your what's it called? Trace. It absorbs your trace.
Trace, that's it. Yeah.
And she was an up and coming singer. You're right. Like her songs were very like trying to unite the people of Cloudbank. And what they wanted to do was, because the transistor is like a quote unquote remote control that they can use to shape the city to the whims of the people, they wanted to absorb her trace and kind of use that in that process. The boxer got in the way. And so because he got in the way, he ended up inside the transistor, and her voice was just kind of collateral damage. It's also inside the transistor, but it didn't get all of her. And so that's why when you kill a villain with a transistor, their trace becomes one of your attacks, because they got absorbed the way Red should have been, which is just a neat little bit of storytelling there that I love a lot. So let's talk about the characters, shall we?
Yeah, definitely. Red, I mean, despite the fact that she is a voiceless protagonist, is really neat. I think, besides the fact that we get a lot of who she is through the Transistor's narrative and like him telling us what she's like, we do see a lot of instances of how what she's like. Like she, there's a bit where she stands in front of a poster and like stares at it longingly, and that like does convey a lot about what her character is like and how conflicted she is about her singing. We see there's a bit where they order flatbread to be sent to their old apartment, and they're like fighting their way through the city, but she's like, oh yeah, no, I definitely want to get some flatbread to pick up, and like it's really cute. There are a lot of very, again, subtle and little character moments that really do add to the character of Red, and I think that that Red is a very interesting protagonist, despite the fact that she doesn't have any lines.
Right. Yeah, I love her. I have a big old poster of Red in my living room. She's great. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool stylistic choices they make with just the way she like dresses too, right? Like she rips her big beautiful gown so that she has a shorter dress to run around in and wreak havoc on. She rides like a cool motorcycle the whole time. Also, don't know if you noticed, but the jacket she wears is the boxers. She wears her...
Oh,
yeah, she wears her dead boyfriend's jacket around, which is sad, but gives her a cool silhouette. We do appreciate a stylish revenge queen. We really do. Speaking of the boxer, he's got a lot of lines. Talks a lot, chatty boy.
Sure does. Yeah, I liked him. I mean, I think we do get a lot of interesting dialogue. I mean, the voice actor does a great job, of course. Great voice. I think he was also in Bastion too.
Yeah, he's in everything. He's Logan Cunningham. He's like one of the founding members of Supergiant, and then Ashley Lynn Barrett is the singing voice of Red, and she's also like a founding force. She's the voice of Eurydice in Hades.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, again, like there is that tension between like we don't know like whether or not they can actually hear each other, Red and the Transistor. I just kind of assumed that they could, though. Like, I don't know, maybe that kind of, I never felt that there was any narrative tension between that, like any confusion about whether or not they could actually hear each other. It always just seemed like they were able to communicate. I don't know. I'm the kind of person who, like, when I read the Garfield strips, I assume that Garfield and John are talking to each other. So I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Well, I think you're supposed to assume that they can hear each other, right? Because she never does anything to contradict him necessarily. But when he's like, hey, you can hear me, right? You're like, wait. But at the same time, she's never done anything to prove that she can. She just kind of keeps fighting. So I think that they use the assumption that I think most of us made, that they can hear each other in a really clever way in that moment.
Yeah, definitely. I there are parts where I get a little bit frustrated with their narration, especially like when I'm getting my ass kicked in combat and he's like, hey, are you there? Can you hear me? It's like, yeah, dog, I'm having a bad time. Please don't rub it in. But otherwise, I think it's a good job.
Yeah, and now we can talk about our favorite group of angry gays, the Camerata.
Yeah, the Camerata are interesting, right? Like, I didn't bring up Asher and Grant at all. They are also members of the Camerata. But, like, Sybil, Asher, Grant, and Royce, they are, you know, like, general evil, like, nerds. But, like, you have to, like, get pretty deep into understanding the Camerata's lore. And, like, they don't tell you it textually. Like, you have to seek it out. It's not delivered in narration. But apparently, like, they are all, like, administrators of some type in the city, and like the reason that they were so frustrated with all the people voting on whatever they wanted Cloudbank to be is because they explain this in their motto, when everything changes, nothing does, and like that's their whole philosophy, which is why they wanted to make this thing that like changed everything. And yeah, I don't know, I found it so hard to connect with them, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think this is where maybe the tiny text on the Switch issue is quite problematic, because so much of their information is in those little UI segments and in communicating with them through their terminals and seeing their old posts in the terminals. Because, so like Asher and Grant, this isn't like explicit, but it kind of is. They're married, they're husbands.
Yeah.
They have the same last name, they look nothing alike. And there is some text that refers to them being like basically each other's like other half. They commit suicide because they saw what happened to Sybil when she started to get infected by the process, and they were like, not us, and they killed themselves 20 minutes before, or 16 minutes before Red gets to the tower where they are. So she, nobody got a chance to like save them. And then Royce is just an insufferable little dweeb.
He also does the thing that like is a very good thing to do in media if you're trying to make your villain really a piece of shit, which is that he doesn't go himself to like go and talk to the protagonist. He sends like a little TV robot that floats around and provides narration, and he is like, this is what my motivations were, and this is how I thought everything was gonna go out, but I guess it didn't. And also when he shows up in fights, like he is present with you during fights, but he just has a little shield on and doesn't help you at all. It's so annoying, and I think that's a great way to be like, fuck this guy.
Yeah, he's truly the epitome of fuck this guy, because the whole thing is that when Sybil convinced the Camerata that Red was important. She did so because what she wanted to do was have Red all to herself. That's the whole thing. Sybil was like, she's hot, I'm hot, we're going to be together forever. Fuck that tall dude that keeps hanging around her. And so she convinced the Camerata that she would be an important target. The whole thing goes south. And then because Royce needed the transistor back, because it's like the key to this whole process-based operation, he released the process into the city. So, and then the process got out of control, and he was like, oh no, I fucked up a little bit. And then he has to like tell Red his whole like big megalomaniacal plan. But he is truly, like, you are right. Seeing him stand there just a useless piece of shit, you're like, do something. Be useful. Apparently you can wield the transistor, pick up a stick, fight these off. I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, Royce was a wild animal, and there's this like whole long trek to get to him. It's very melodramatic, which I appreciate in aesthetic. You know me, I love an aesthetic. But even though she is the first boss fight that you have, Sybil is the one that always sticks out to me. You mentioned that, like, the music that plays. There's two versions of every song in Transistor. There's like the regular song, and there's kind of a corrupted version of the song. And basically, Sybil starts to get corrupted by the process, and like all of her in battle dialogue is very much about like having wanted to get closer to Red, and the sort of like corrupted version of In Circles plays, or is it In Circles?
Yes, it's In Circles. There we go.
Yeah, okay, so
Crushed
great. In Circles, that song I have sheet music for. What a shocker. Yeah, so the whole line is like, but I won't save you. It's a very atmospheric time in which you do have to like help a woman as she's being possessed by the process, and when she dies. So when people are on the ground, you can get a percentage bar of how processed they are, and Sybil turns back to 0 just before she dies. So you do like save her, but she dies. So I think about that moment a lot. It's a very impactful fight.
It definitely feels like I played a different video game than all the people who played Transistor. I'm like, this is the best game ever, because like, I don't know if I'm just dense and I need dialogue and character motivations and everything to be delivered to me explicitly, but like I missed so much of this stuff that seems like it did add quite a lot. And I think that on a second or third playthrough, I'd finally, I'd actually sort of get it. But yeah, like, I could tell that like Sybil was very interesting, and I was glad that like that much emphasis was put on the first character. But I definitely felt like Sybil was a more interesting character than like basically any other member of the Camerata.
Yeah, I mean, like, I won't lie to you. I did have to look up Grant Nasher's names again because I kind of forgot about them. But yeah, it's like Sybil and Royce get a lot of the spotlight, and Grant Nasher, you really have to like be present in the terminal for. They do have personalities, they're interesting in their own ways. They have their roles to play, especially Grant being the oldest of the bunch, and he's kind of like the one with the most say, even though the leader, quote unquote, is technically Royce. Royce is just louder, really. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that, I mean, Supergiant always does this. It's a lot of environmental storytelling. And a lot of the environmental storytelling is reading. It's an interactive story, right? It's somewhere between it's somewhere in between interactive fiction and like an RPG. It occupies a really interesting nether space, and I don't know, I don't see a lot of people doing that, where I hadn't until I feel like Pillars of Eternity kind of occupies the same space. There's a lot more like narrative heavy, kind of like you get as deep as you want to get in these games by how much reading you want to do, which I think is a fantastic place to be, and you just have to be in the right mood for it.
Yeah. Let's put a pin in that, because we're probably going to talk about environmental storytelling and the ways that Transistor delivers its narrative and themes. But let's talk about the process real quick. Your note says, kind of like the Promare, kind of like the Citadel robots in Mass Effect.
Yeah, because they're like weird little robots that are supposedly the things that change the city around, right? And the Transistor, in the way Royce was trying to use it, is like supposed to control them, I think, if I'm understanding the lore correctly. But also they're supposedly not from this dimension.
Oh. Okay, I didn't catch that at all.
So I picked that up in a little bit of reading that I was doing to prep for this podcast. Yeah, but so they're robots. I think the evil Apple aesthetic is like really spot on. They're like white robots with red eyes. They are friend shaped, but they're not friendly.
Some of them have like very silly names. Like one of them, like the little eggs are just like bad robots, and one of them is named like young lady, and then the big scary ones are named jerk. Like that rules.
Oh yeah, and those are naming conventions that come over from Bastion too. There's a lot of really funky guys, some lads, hanging out.
Very shaped.
Yeah, no, I love the process. I think they're really cool. I think that especially when you go back to like the first couple areas you play through, after Royce kind of inserts himself more into the narrative, and they're like all corrupted. It's cool, right? I mean, it's sad, but it's all like white, and all of Cloudbank is so teal and gold that all of a sudden you come into these white areas that you've known before, and it's just really troubling. It's an interesting.
There's also like a really good portion where Red goes back to the stage that she used to perform on, and like this is like pretty late game, but the process are all like sitting there like waiting as if they were an audience, and when you hum they like respond to it, and like that was very affecting to me. And I think Games as Lit makes this point that like that moment shows that, you know, now that the process have been unleashed and are starting to like roam about the world, like maybe it's, you know, Red, maybe it's just having gained information by being unleashed, like, but they are becoming more than just robots. They are gaining some sort of personhood or a sapience. And that's a really neat touch.
Right, which makes sense when you consider that the transistor is absorbing the essence of a person, right? Mm-hmm. So those are generally speaking our characters. There's also some minor characters, but they're not. There's like a weatherman, I think. He's a good time.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I feel like not being able to read the terminal and respond takes away like a lot of the texture of Cloudbank, I guess. So that's a bummer. But yeah, those are our folks. Do we want to get into Cloudbank?
Yeah, I mean, like, I didn't really, again, like, I just did not catch on to any of this stuff, but until like it was explained to me later on. But like, there are so many interesting ideas going on with Cloudbank, like the idea that, you know, you could democratically create a city to be whatever you want it to be, and therefore the city just constantly changes as people, you know, are like, oh, I want the sky to be like purple today. Like that's a very interesting concept, and I really like the little storytelling touches that I did catch on to, like, you know, the fact that people are voting, and the fact that, you know, there's also like super delivery service in Cloudbank. I think it's a really neat concept. Yeah,
like a fully kind of automated utopia almost, where it changes on the daily. Yeah, I feel like so another Supergiant, I guess, theme in a lot of their stories is this like reliance on a cultural or atmospheric isolation. So Bastion and Transistor have this in common, where you do have other characters you talk to, right? So you have the Transistor, you have the Camerata. There are other characters there for you to interact with, but the thing that changes is you get the familiar taken away from you. So you know, Cloudbank becomes processed over time. And so there's just places you just no longer get access to after a while. And you can physically see it becoming white as it's being processed. So, yeah, I guess the thing worth talking about is, like, even without catching all of the storytelling in terms of, like, the attacks being too small, did you still... You know, were there any other impactful moments for you where like the world was changing, and did you pick up on that sort of like sense of isolation?
No, I like when I was playing, like I didn't start realizing that the world was even changing until like very close to the end, where like, you know, Royce had shown up and was that little TV, and I was like, oh, everything's just white squares now. That's different. And like, yeah, I think that read is very interesting, that, you know, the process consuming Cloudbank is isolation. Because I mean, that is ultimately what happens to Red, right? She's left alone, you know, the god of a new world, but, you know, alone, you know, with only the process to hang out with her. And like, you know, that is a very powerful theme that Transistor is able to pull on, and I do appreciate that you pointed that out.
Yeah, well, because in the end, you know, she chooses death over isolation. That's not like death. Still, you know.
Yeah, I think, you know, Games as Lit makes this point that like we don't want to be glorifying suicide, and, you know, Red makes this choice, and like there is a read where it's like, oh, she died by suicide and that made her happy, which is like, that's not really the right way to read it, right? She knows that she's not actually dying. She's going to be with the boxer in like a virtual, you know, paradise, and it's a different thing. But I do want to clarify, like, you know, this is not a game that textually or explicitly is glorifying suicide.
No. Yeah, it very much codifies the fact that, like, your trace lives on within the transistor. So as long as there's a transistor, there's a you, which is another interesting thing in the sense that, like, when you have these capsule narratives, there's so many, I guess, loose threads at the end, right? Because you're just diving into this really rich world. There's so many questions, and you don't get all the answers. You get to just kind of speculate. But I don't know. I don't find it frustrating like I do with a lot of other things. I think that the threads that they choose to leave open are usually the right threads, right? So it's not, I don't know. I think it's a nice, but all of this happens within I think the thing I find most interesting about Supergiant Games is, like, so many games nowadays are obsessed with choice, right? Like, you get to make choices all the time. There's, like, whole genres of RPGs where, like, your choice matters, right? You got your Dragon Ages, your Mass Effects, your Witchers, you know, Cyberpunks, all these different massive sandbox games where your choices matter, right? You don't get choices in Transistor. You
get one choice, which is the type of flatbread to order.
Hell yeah, that's the only choice you need. You get some choices in Pyre that's just like the order of your friends that get to go to the surface. But then, you know, in Hades you get a lot more choices. But Transistor is truly like a linear narrative, which you don't see a lot, but it does still generate feeling, right? Like you said, when she goes back to the empty stage and there's some stuff. I always find it interesting from your perspective because you do a lot of work on the TTRPG space. And, you know, you hang out there a lot, which is a lot of, like, improv, player choice. From, I guess, that perspective, are there any lessons to be learned about evoking choice or evoking emotion from a player in a situation that is maybe a little bit more linear and doesn't depend on their choice making, but just their kind of involvement in participating in the story?
Yeah, I mean, I think linear video games are threading such a difficult needle because, like you're saying, right, in a TTRPG, like, half of the fun comes from the fact that it is improvisational and, like, you are playing and collaboratively building a story. At least, you know, you probably should be collaboratively building a story if you're playing a TTRPG to some degree. And, like, the fun of that is, like, oh, I'm going to make my character make a decision, and that's going to have an impact, and I'm going to, you know, be excited to see what that impact is. You know, like you said, there are plenty of you know, RPGs that have choices, you know, Mass Effect and your Witchers, which ultimately don't really affect the story at all. And, like, I think that Supergiant Games and Transistor do a very smart thing, which is, like, we're not, you know, we have a story we're going to tell it efficiently, and you can play through it, but, like, it is ultimately still our story. I think that's a smart choice, even though it is difficult, right? Because, like, you know, this was 2014, so I don't know how much player choice was actually being a thing that was touted. It might have been, you know, this is coming right off of Mass Effect, so, like, this is 2014 though, so this is also the conversation, like, this is pre-Gamergate, like, or, like, releasing right around Gamergate, but you know, the game space started to have these conversations about, like, narrative design and choice, and it wasn't just, you know, the graphics are great, but, like, yeah, it is so with a game, right, with a video game, there should be some element of interactivity, but I feel it is much more important to solidly deliver on the themes and narratives and, you know, plot points you want to hit on in your story, over, you know, giving a player a facsimile of choice. You know, the difference between a linear video game and a tabletop is that in a tabletop, the fun comes from, you know, what you and your friends are able to do based on the choices you make. In a linear, you know, video game, you are playing through a story and that allows you to have immersion and you feel more connected to the characters. But, like, the fun comes from playing through a story that has already been authored. And depending on how the author, the writing goes, your mileage may vary, but Supergiant has a pretty good track record at this point of having pretty compelling narratives. So I'm very happy with the way that they've delivered on this type of game design. And I think you and I are both in that camp of like, we want shorter video games with worse graphics that our people are paid more money to work less to make, and like that's all right here. And despite the fact that I did have trouble connecting with it, I am very happy that this is how it turned out.
Yeah, I mean, I am bummed that you didn't get kind of like the full fun posting on Reddit to change the color of the sky experience. But yeah, it's I really love subtle storytelling, right? I love I follow a lot of like environment artists on Twitter, and there's a joke going around that some folks used to kind of hammer on the Dishonored series for like beating you over the head with like graffiti on the walls that are like, the government sucks. I love that stuff. As somebody who does frequently drive by a bridge nearby that does have COVID-19 84 graffitied onto it, people just like be like that. I'm not joking. I drive by that bridge several times a week. Yeah, so I'm not too surprised, but I really love environmental storytelling because I think player choice is awesome, but I also like when somebody understands where they're good at telling stories and they just pick like two avenues. And I was playing Pillars of Eternity recently, and there was just too many avenues of me being told context for things, which is, some people really like that. I am too distracted. You have to pick two for me. You have to be like, okay, you can either read a codex entry or you can talk to these characters. And it was like codex entry, characters hovering over the script, which is, again, fine, but just my brain's small and smooth. So when I'm playing a video game, it's too much context. But Supergiant does this really nice thing where it forces you to slow down, and you're like, okay, I'm going to go read 4 paragraphs of a terminal entry now. And it's going to be juicy because 4 incredibly melodramatic queers kind of caused the apocalypse. So, yeah. I mean, I'm one of those people that, like, player choice really doesn't... I don't know. For a long time, I thought I valued player choice, but now I'm kind of like, I don't know. Interactive narrative in itself is really cool, especially when it does things to twist your perception of the story it's been trying to tell for a while. So, when you start out in Transistor, where it's a story about your boyfriend turning into a sword, which, listen, it feels like a tragedy, but like, is it? I think Boyfriend Dungeon was onto something.
I know plenty of women who would be better off if their boyfriends were swords. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, if you can transform into a sword, I'll bleep this in the edit, but my phone number is call me. It's a lot, but there was a point I was trying to get at, and now I'm thinking about sword boyfriends, and I've kind of lost it. Oh, right. The point was that, like, if you can find an interesting way to subvert my perception of the story and of your characters, then I'm generally kind of in. And, like, having the story start out as boyfriend turns into sword, which, again, tragedy, plausible. It's all about your perspective, baby. And then turning it into, like, hey, actually, we're going to make this about, I guess, like, Red's participation in a society that, like you said, like, doesn't change by way of changing too much. And, her relationship with existing in that world as it's changing then too quickly. And also we're going to plant a seed of doubt that the communication you, the player, have been getting from the sword is being received by Red at all, like having that distance put between your perception of the narrative. That's all really cool stuff to me. I think that's all really, really neat. And I have been on this podcast for a long time as a fan of companies trying things. I like it when you try things. And I think that's why I love Supergiant so much, is because every game is different and they're constantly trying something. Even if it doesn't succeed, I think there's parts of Pyre I didn't really find all that successful for me personally. They're always trying stuff, and I think that's amazing and awesome, and I'm for it. And yes, smaller games made by happier people, please. Yeah. That's my tangent. Send tweet.
Very good. All right. Well, Leyla, if people want to hear us talk more about smaller games made by happier people, where can they find us on the internet?
I'm at LEYLSES on Twitter and Tumblr. I'm unemployed. I'm just vibing right now. Aaron, how about you?
You can find me on the internet at AaronSXL on Twitter, where I talk about health policy and tabletop RPGs. You can listen to the other podcasts I do at The Bible Boys. We are just about to ramp up into the part of the year where Michael makes us watch 4 horror movies, and me and Josh hate it, but we agree to do it every year anyway. But we also just released an episode about Christian TikTok, which is absolutely deranged. So please check that out. Our theme song is Obsolete by Keshko from the album Filmmakers Reference Kit Volume 2. You can find more of their music at keshko.bandcamp.com. Leyla, how, as we say goodbye to Cloudbank, should we close this one out?
Look, whatever we're thinking, just do me a favor. Don't let go.